What about the duration of training? Remember, the duration is the how long do we train for? Well, this is the quantitative component, and it's the quantitative component referring to the time or the amount of exercise in a training session. And fundamentally, it has an inverse relationship to intensity. So if you think very simply back to perhaps Physiology 101, and you think about the force-velocity relationship, or you think about the power versus time relationship, what you'll remember is a high power output can only be sustained for a short period of time, a low power output can be sustained for a long period of time. You get a hyperbolic relationship between those variables. We cannot tolerate high intensity training over a long duration, which goes back to the comment that I made previously in relation to intensity of training, which was we cannot tolerate high volumes of high intensity training. But I've used the term volume a moment ago. Don't conflate volume and duration. They are not the same thing. Duration is absolutely how long we train for. Volume, which we're about to get to, is a composite of duration and frequency. So at the moment we're viewing these as individual parameters, whereas actually volume is a combination of the duration and the frequency of training. So here we've got a data set. This was published a while back. This was published in 96, but it's a really nice data set in terms of just exploring for us the effects of training duration on substrate, in this case turnover and oxidation. So what you've got is blood lactate levels, and here we've got the blood lactate concentration in recovery following a training period. And what you can see here is pre 5 days and 31 days into training. And of course what you see is as the training period is increased, the overall duration is slightly different. So this is the overall duration of training. What we start to see at every given marker point, the blood lactate concentration is lower. So there may be some caveats in this. You might argue, well, maybe they've done different intensities of training and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, this is a really important parameter, is that duration becomes really important in terms of what we do. That there is no such thing as a quick fix in training. And actually there has to be a recognition that we have to do a lot of training, whether it's for physical fitness in clinical population groups, just physical fitness for the general population, or working with athletes, to start to see those biological adaptations that we're looking for. And we can see that here. So again, we go back to this same data set from Vernborn, and what you have here is the length of training period. So this is just the total duration the individual trained for, and then the increase in the cross-sectional area. And it's perhaps a little less clear in this data set, right? But actually, what we start to see, if you just follow what's going on, you'll see down here where the training period is quite short, the degree of cross-sectional gain is relatively small. So what we're going to do is, where we've got multiple studies that have kind of taken the same duration of training, we're going to take a middle ground. So if you just follow my marker, and what you start to see is as the duration increases, we start to see we've got this one here, but then notice it starts to fall. Now, it may be that's a manifestation of what the studies have done, but it's also almost certainly something to recognize, which is in a lot of studies and a lot of training, people don't necessarily recognize that you have to balance the intensity with the duration. So you could have a training intervention which is, say, 40 days, and my mean response here was a cross-sectional area gain of 5%. And then I come up to here, which is 160 days, but my mean response is only, say, 10%. I haven't gained much more, have I? I've gained, but not a huge amount more, certainly not compared to what I've got here, about 130 days. So why? Well, fundamentally, as we start to adapt, we have to have what is called progressive overload. We cannot just keep the intensity at the same level. Remember I said there is this relationship between intensity and duration. We cannot tolerate high intensity for long periods of time. But we also have to recognize that we're getting biological adaptation over time. And as we're biologically adapting, we have to readjust the intensity. So it is very possible in a large number of these studies that they've just used the same training intensity throughout. So the gain becomes progressively less. They're still gaining, but not to the same degree that you're seeing down here. I'm looking at here at a 10% gain over 80 days and a 10% gain over 160 days. There's nothing to be gained, it seems, right? But it would be something to be gained if the intensity was adjusted as you get biological adaptation over the course of the training period. So view the duration in that context. So go back to the data we collected from our marathon runners. So again, the same groupings in terms of performance that we've got here and here. Now, here we've got our index of duration. These are hours per week. Again, notice, really interesting, that the duration for which they train for, irrespective of the performance level, is really quite similar, isn't it? It goes from about 6.5 hours to 8 hours. But generally, these two groups are almost identical, but actually have anywhere between half an hour to an hour's difference in performance. And actually, there's almost no difference to this group, and not massive difference to this group here. This is a slight outlier group, it seems, slight to a certain degree. But again, it's that understanding of duration has a significant role, but duration will be related to intensity. So remember, if we then just kind of look at these in terms of the run speeds, I just want to show you these in terms of the run speeds. We haven't got these in this data set. We have got these in a data set where we've computed these as a kind of percentage of performance time. But look at the speeds at which they're running at. You would argue, actually, you'd think, well, hold on, fundamentally these are all, there's quite big differences here. But think about these in relation to race speeds. So this is 11.4 kilometers an hour. This is race speed is 14.9. 11.1, 12.8. So these two are running at very similar speeds in training, but this group are actually training at a much higher percentage of their race speed. Might explain that slight difference that you've got here in the duration. This group here, 10 kilometers an hour, race speed of 11.3. So proportionally, actually, they've gone down by a kilometre here, and they've gone down by over a kilometre here. So again, it may be that it explains to a certain degree why this duration is less. So it's again helping us to understand the interplay between duration and intensity.